My daughter-in-law said to me, "You do nothing all day. Watch the kids while I travel." She had no idea that by the time she came back, she wouldn't have a husband, she wouldn't have her children, and she wouldn't have a home. She thought I was just a retired old woman, invisible and irrelevant. She never expected that I was the one who would take everything from her. The phone call came on a Tuesday. I remember the sun was streaming through my kitchen window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. It was the kind of quiet, golden afternoon I had dreamed of for 40 years while I was teaching second graders how to read. My first month of retirement felt like a long, slow, beautiful exhale. I had plans. I was going to turn the spare bedroom into an art studio, plant a rose garden in the backyard, maybe even take that trip to the coast I'd been putting off since my husband, David, passed away. The world was finally my own. Then the phone rang, and my son Benjamin's wife, Brooke, was on the other end. Her voice was like ice cubes clinking in an empty glass, sharp, cold, and hollow. "Teresa," she said, not bothering with a hello. "I need you to watch the kids for 2 weeks. I have a work trip. It's mandatory." I could hear the impatience in her tone, the assumption that my time was a blank check she could cash whenever she pleased. I took a breath, trying to keep my voice even. "Oh, that's quite a long time, Brooke. What kind of trip is it?" A sigh crackled through the phone. "It's a leadership conference in Puerto Vallarta. You wouldn't understand. Look, can you do it or not? It's not like you have anything better to do. You're retired now. You do nothing all day. You do nothing." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and dripping with condescension. 40 years of lesson plans, parent-teacher conferences, scraped knees, and bake sales. A lifetime of raising my own son after his father died, working 2 jobs to make sure he had everything he needed, putting my own dreams on hold so he could go to a good college, Ohio State, his dream school. All of it, my entire life's work, was reduced to nothing. For a moment, a hot, white anger flared in my chest. I wanted to tell her about the sleepless nights, about selling my own grandmother's locket just to afford Christmas dinner one year. I wanted to tell her that my nothing was earned with sweat and tears and sacrifice she couldn't possibly comprehend. But I didn't. Instead, a different idea began to form in my mind, cold and clear as a winter morning. It was an idea so audacious, so contrary to my nature, that it almost took my breath away. She saw me as a doormat, a convenient, free-of-charge babysitter. She had no respect for me, for my home, or for the sacrifices I made that allowed her to live the comfortable life she had. For years, she had been systematically trying to push me out of my son's life, making me feel like a stranger to my own grandchildren. She thought she was in control. She thought she held all the cards. But she was about to learn a lesson that wasn't in any of her fancy leadership conference brochures. So I smiled, a small, secret smile she couldn't see. "Of course, Brooke," I said, my voice sweet as honey. "I'd be happy to help. When do you need me?" She never even heard the click of the trap being set. That phone call set in motion a chain of events that would unravel a web of deceit so dark and twisted it would make your skin crawl. It forced me to ask myself 3 questions that kept me awake for the next 2 weeks. First, how could a mother be so cruel to her own children without anyone noticing? Second, how could my own son be so blind to the monster he married? And finally, the question that truly terrified me, what was I capable of becoming to protect the people I loved? If you stay with me, I promise you, the answer to that last question will shock you. It shocked me, because I learned that when a grandmother is pushed to the edge, she won't just fight back. She will burn down the whole world to keep her family safe. And that's exactly what I did. This isn't just a story about a family argument. It's about the devastating secrets that can hide behind a perfect suburban facade, and the terrifying lengths a person will go to for revenge. Brooke thought she was leaving her children with a feeble old woman. She had no idea she was leaving them with the one person who would finally expose her for what she truly was, and who would orchestrate her downfall with the precision of a master strategist. She was going to a leadership conference, all right. But the real lesson in power and consequence was about to begin, right here, in my quiet little house. And I was going to be the teacher. To understand why I did what I did, you have to understand the life I lived before Brooke. You have to understand what it cost me to build the family she was so determined to destroy. My story, the real one, doesn't begin with that phone call. It begins 30 years ago, on a rainy April morning, when I stood in a cemetery holding the hand of my 3-year-old son, Benjamin, and watched them lower my husband's casket into the ground. David was a good man, a construction worker with strong hands and a laugh that could fill a whole house. A scaffolding collapse at a downtown site took him from us in an instant. One moment, I was a wife and a mother planning a future, and the next, I was a widow with a toddler on my hip, a mortgage I couldn't afford, and a future that looked like a long, dark tunnel with no light at the end. The life insurance was barely enough to cover the funeral. We were left with our small house and David's old pickup truck. I was a teacher, but a teacher's salary back then wasn't meant to support a family on its own. The first few years were a blur of exhaustion. I'd wake up before dawn, get Ben ready for daycare, teach a full day of second grade, then rush to my evening job cleaning offices downtown. I'd come home long after Ben was asleep, my body aching and my hands raw from cleaning chemicals. I'd check on him in his little bed, his face so peaceful, and I'd just stand there in the dark, gathering the strength to do it all again the next day. People would say, "Teresa, you're so strong." But I didn't feel strong. I felt like a wire pulled so taut it was humming, and I was terrified that one day, it would just snap. My one goal, the one thing that kept me going, was Benjamin. I was determined that he would never feel the weight of our struggle. He would have a normal childhood. He would have everything he needed to succeed. This meant sacrifices. Little ones at first, like giving up my morning coffee or patching up my own clothes instead of buying new ones. But then the sacrifices got bigger. I remember one Christmas, Ben was about 7, and all he wanted was this fancy new video game console that all his friends were getting. I had no money. The heating bill had been astronomical, and the truck needed a new transmission. I looked around our little house, at the threadbare furniture and the peeling paint, and my eyes landed on the small jewelry box on my dresser. Inside was the last piece of real value I owned. A delicate gold locket my grandmother had given me. It had a tiny diamond chip in the center. It was my most treasured possession. That afternoon, I walked into a pawn shop for the first time in my life. The man behind the counter barely looked at it before offering me $100. It felt like he was ripping a piece of my heart out, but I took the money. That Christmas morning, the look of pure, unadulterated joy on Benjamin's face when he unwrapped that console. It was worth it. It was worth 1,000 gold lockets. He never knew what it cost me. I never wanted him to. My job was to carry the weight so he could fly. And he did fly. He was a brilliant student, driven and kind. He worked hard, got a scholarship, and was accepted into Ohio State University to study business. The day we drove him to Columbus to move into his dorm, I thought my heart would burst with pride. All those years of cleaning toilets, of eating plain pasta so he could have meat, of staying up late to help him with his homework, it had all led to this. My son was going to have the life his father and I had dreamed of for him. He was safe. He was on his way. He met Brooke during his junior year. When he first brought her home for Thanksgiving, I was completely charmed. She was beautiful, with a dazzling smile and a sharp, witty sense of humor. She was studying law and spoke passionately about wanting to help people. She looked at Benjamin with such adoration, and he was completely smitten. She would come into the kitchen while I was cooking and ask about my day, listen to my stories about teaching, and call my recipes legendary. She made me feel seen. For the first time, I thought, my son has found a partner who truly appreciates him, who will build a life with him. I loved her because he loved her. I welcomed her into my home and into my heart with open arms. I saw her as the daughter I never had. The wedding was beautiful. I cried through the whole ceremony. Seeing my son standing there, so handsome and happy, felt like the final piece of a puzzle falling into place. I had done it. I had raised a good man, and he had found a good woman. The first year of their marriage was happy, or so it seemed. But slowly, things began to change. The shifts were so subtle at first that I barely noticed them. Brooke would make little comments, always with a laugh, so you couldn't be sure if it was a joke. When I brought over a homemade casserole, she'd say, "Oh, Teresa, you shouldn't have. We're trying to watch our carbs." If I offered Benjamin advice about a leaky faucet, she'd jump in with, "Don't worry, Mom, I've got a guy for that. We don't want Ben hurting his hands." It was always presented as care or concern, but the underlying message was clear. You're not needed. Your way is old. My way is better. When their first child, Aiden, was born, I was over the moon. I knitted blankets, bought tiny outfits, and dreamed of babysitting my first grandchild. But Brooke had other ideas. "We're on a very strict schedule, Teresa," she'd say. "The pediatrician says it's important not to disrupt his routine." When I'd offer to help, she'd smile that tight, bright smile and say, "Thanks, but I've got it under control. Your parenting ideas are a little old-fashioned. We do things differently now." I was allowed to visit for an hour at a time, always under her watchful eye. I was never allowed to be alone with him. She made me feel like a visitor, a stranger in my own son's family. Then came Benita and finally little Leo. With each child, the distance grew. The excuses became more elaborate. My home wasn't properly child-proofed. I would spoil them with sweets. I didn't understand modern discipline. Benjamin, bless his heart, was caught in the middle. He was working incredibly long hours at his new firm, trying to provide for his growing family. When he came home, he was exhausted, and Brooke would feed him a carefully curated version of the day's events. If I mentioned feeling left out, he'd say, "Mom, Brooke is just stressed. She's trying to be the perfect mother. Just give her some space." He didn't see the manipulation. He only saw a tired wife and a mother he didn't want to upset. He just wanted peace. I understood, so I bit my tongue. I swallowed the hurt because I didn't want to be the cause of conflict in my son's marriage. I took whatever scraps of time with my grandchildren Brooke was willing to give me. The final, shattering blow came on Benita's 5th birthday. I had spent weeks planning. Benita loved princesses, so I had sewn a beautiful princess costume by hand and baked a magnificent castle-shaped cake. I was so excited. An hour before the party was supposed to start, I got a text from Brooke. "So sorry, Teresa, but we've decided to have a smaller party, just with Benita's school friends. The kids can get so overwhelmed. We'll celebrate with you another time." I knew it was a lie. I drove past their house later that afternoon just to see. The yard was full of balloons. I could see the parents of Benita's friends mingling inside. My son's car was in the driveway. They were all there, celebrating without me. I had been deliberately, cruelly excluded. I sat in my car across the street and just watched. I saw my granddaughter through the window, wearing a store-bought princess dress, not the one I had poured my love into. And in that moment, something inside me broke. It was a quiet, clean break. The hope I'd been clinging to, the hope that one day Brooke would see me, that she'd value me, that we could be a real family. It just vanished. All that was left was a cold, hard clarity. This wasn't about schedules or old-fashioned ideas. This was about control. Brooke saw me as a threat. I was a reminder of a past she didn't want to be a part of, a symbol of a different kind of love for her husband and children. She wasn't just pushing me away. She was trying to erase me. My silence, my desire to keep the peace, had been a mistake. It hadn't protected my son. It had enabled his wife. It hadn't brought me closer to my grandchildren. It had taught them I was disposable. I drove home that day a different woman. The soft, accommodating grandmother was gone. In her place was a person I barely recognized. A person who understood that if you want to win a war that's been waged in whispers and smiles, you can't fight with love and patience. You have to fight with strategy. You have to be smarter, quieter, and more ruthless than your enemy. I didn't know how or when, but I knew with absolute certainty that a day of reckoning was coming. I started paying closer attention, listening more than I spoke, and filing away every condescending comment, every lie, every little act of cruelty. I was building a case in the quiet corners of my mind. So when Brooke called that Tuesday, with her demand and her dismissive, insulting words, she thought she was talking to the same old Teresa, the pushover, the woman who would do anything for a few precious hours with her grandchildren. She had no idea she was talking to a woman who had been preparing for this exact moment for years. She was handing me the perfect weapon. 2 weeks alone with her children. 2 weeks to undo the damage she had done. 2 weeks to show them what a real family, what real love, felt like. She thought she was dropping them off for a vacation. She had no idea she was dropping them off for an intervention. And as I hung up the phone, the sun still streaming through my window, I felt a grim sense of purpose settle over me. The game was on. And this time, I was going to win. The day Brooke was set to leave, she arrived precisely on time, which was her way of showing you that her schedule was important and yours was not. She pulled her gleaming white SUV into my driveway, the engine cutting off with a soft, expensive purr that sounded alien on my quiet street. I watched from the living room window as the doors opened. Aiden, who was 12, tumbled out first, already glued to his phone. Benita, my sweet, quiet 9-year-old, followed, clutching a worn-out teddy bear. And finally 7-year-old Leo, a little ball of chaotic energy, scrambled out last, leaving a trail of cracker crumbs on the pristine leather seats. They looked like 3 little strangers, disconnected from each other and the world, each lost in their own bubble of digital distraction. Brooke emerged from the driver's side like a queen stepping out of a chariot. She was wearing a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and sunglasses so large they hid half her face. She didn't smile. She surveyed my small, neat lawn with a faint look of disapproval, as if my cheerful marigolds were in personal offense. I opened the door before she could knock. "Hello, Brooke. Kids, come on in." They trudged past me without a word, their eyes still locked on their screens. Brooke followed, her heels clicking sharply on my hardwood floors. She wrinkled her nose slightly, a gesture I had come to know well. It was her silent judgment on my home, my clean, comfortable, lived-in home, which to her probably just looked old. She handed me a binder, thick with laminated pages. "This is their schedule," she announced, her voice brisk and devoid of any warmth. "Mealtimes, screen times, approved snacks, tutoring sessions via Zoom. It's all in there. Don't deviate from it." I flipped through the pages. It was less of a schedule and more of a military operation. Every 15-minute increment of their day was accounted for. There was no room for spontaneity, no time for play, no space for them to just be children. It was a manual for raising tiny, efficient robots. "And another thing," she continued, lowering her voice as if sharing a state secret. "Don't let them have too much sugar. And don't talk to them about the old days. It just confuses them. We're trying to be forward-thinking in our parenting." What she meant was, don't tell them stories about their father's childhood. Don't let them form a connection to a past that doesn't include me. The final instruction was the one that made my blood run cold. She leaned in closer, her perfume cloying and sweet. "And Teresa, I've told them you're fragile. That you've been lonely since you retired. So if you seem a little emotional, they'll understand. It helps them build empathy." She was framing me as a pathetic old woman, preemptively invalidating any genuine emotion I might show them. She wasn't just giving me instructions. She was poisoning the well, ensuring her children would see me through her lens of pity and contempt. She was painting me as a charity case she was graciously helping by giving me a purpose. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and my pension doesn't cover my property taxes, Brooke," I wanted to say. "My pension is the result of 4 decades of shaping young minds, something you wouldn't understand." But I just smiled. She gave me one last look, a look that said, "You're lucky I'm even letting you do this. Don't mess this up, Teresa. I'll be checking in." And then she was gone, the white SUV disappearing down the street, leaving behind a silence that was heavier than any sound. It was the audacity that struck me the most. The sheer, unadulterated nerve of a person to treat another human being, the mother of her own husband, with such profound disrespect. If you think what Brooke did was wrong, comment "grandmothers deserves respect" below. I closed the door and leaned against it, taking a deep breath. In the living room, the 3 children were camped out on my sofa, side by side but miles apart, their faces illuminated by the eerie blue light of their devices. The house was silent except for the tinny sounds of games and videos. This was the turning point. This was the moment it all began. My plan, which had been a theoretical blueprint in my mind, was now about to become very, very real. The first step was the simplest, and the most disruptive. I walked over to the corner of the room where my internet router sat, its little green lights blinking innocently. With a single, decisive pull, I unplugged it from the wall. For a full 30 seconds nothing happened. Then a wail of outrage came from the couch. "Hey, the Wi-Fi's gone," Aiden yelled, his head snapping up, his face a mask of disbelief. "Mine's gone too," Leo chimed in, looking genuinely panicked. Benita just looked up from her tablet, her big, brown eyes wide with confusion. "Grandma, what happened?" she asked, her voice small. I turned to face them, keeping my expression perfectly calm, perfectly neutral. "I turned it off," I said simply. Aiden shot to his feet. At 12, he was already starting to get that gangly, teenage look, but his face was pure, childish fury. "What do you mean you turned it off? You can't do that. Mom pays for it." He was already parroting her, the lines of battle clearly drawn. In his mind, money equaled authority. "Your mother pays for the internet in her house," I replied, my voice still even. "In my house, I make the rules. And the first rule is we connect with each other, not with screens." "This is stupid," Aiden shouted, his voice cracking. "I have to check on my streaks. I have to talk to my friends. You don't understand anything." He was pacing now, a tiny, enraged general whose supply lines had been cut. "Mom was right about you. She said you were just a lonely old woman who doesn't get how the world works anymore. She said we had to be nice to you because you're bored and have nothing to do." Each word was a slap in the face. Not just because it was cruel, but because it was a direct quote. I could hear Brooke's voice in his, the same tone of condescending pity. She hadn't just warned them I was fragile. She had armed them with insults. She had taught them that my life's experience was not a source of wisdom, but a sign of irrelevance. She had turned my retirement, the rest I had earned after a lifetime of labor, into a weakness they could use against me. I looked at this boy, my first grandchild, and I didn't see him. I saw her. I saw her manipulation, her poison, seeping into the people I loved most. The old me, the Teresa from a month ago, would have been devastated. She would have cried. She would have tried to reason with him, to defend herself, to explain her feelings. But the woman standing in my living room that day was not the old Teresa. I let his words hang in the air, letting the venom drain out of them until they were just empty sounds. I looked at each of them, one by one, meeting their defiant, confused, and angry eyes. The house was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. The power in the room had shifted. They were waiting for me to yell, to break down, to plug the router back in and retreat. They were expecting the fragile, emotional old woman their mother had described. I gave them someone else entirely. "That's an interesting perspective," I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "You seem to believe that things like Wi-Fi are rights, not privileges. In this house, that's going to change. Food, water, a warm bed to sleep in, those are rights. Everything else, from television to tablets to desserts, is a privilege. And privileges," I said, pausing to let the words sink in, "are earned." Leo's jaw dropped. Benita looked like she was about to cry. Aiden just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He had come at me with what he thought was his most powerful weapon, his mother's words, and I had refused to even acknowledge the attack. I had changed the rules of the game completely. "So," I continued, walking over to a small desk where I had placed a notepad and a pen. "Let's talk about how you can start earning some privileges. I'm thinking we can start with chores. Aiden, since you're the oldest, you can be in charge of taking out the trash and helping with the dishes. Benita, you can help me with dusting and feeding the cat. And Leo, you can make sure all your toys are put away every night before bed." "No," Aiden finally exploded. "I'm not doing that. This is slave labor. I'm calling Mom." He whipped his phone out of his pocket, his fingers flying across the screen. He held it to his ear, a triumphant, smug look on his face. The look slowly faded, replaced by confusion, then dawning horror. I smiled, a real smile this time. "There's no Wi-Fi, Aiden," I said gently. "And your cell service doesn't work very well out here. Your mother knows that. We're on our own." The reality of their situation finally crashed down on them. They were trapped. Trapped in a quiet house with no internet, no television. And a grandmother who was not the weak, sad woman they had been promised. She was something else. Something they didn't understand. And for the first time, in their eyes, I saw something other than disrespect. I saw a flicker of fear. The war had begun. And I had just won the first battle without ever raising my voice. The house was quiet again, but this time, it was a different kind of quiet. It was the quiet of a standoff, the deep breath before the storm. And I was ready for the storm. The first night was a war of silence. After the confrontation over the Wi-Fi, the children retreated into a sullen, united front of defiance. I made a simple dinner of spaghetti with meatballs, a meal I used to make for Benjamin that he always called his favorite. The rich, savory smell filled the house, a smell that had always meant comfort and home to me. I hoped it might break through their armor. I was wrong. They came to the table like prisoners on their way to the gallows. Aiden sat with his arms crossed, staring a hole into the wall just past my head. Benita picked at her food, pushing a single meatball around her plate in a perfect circle. Leo, who was usually so full of life, just slumped in his chair, his lower lip trembling slightly. "This is it?" Aiden finally asked, his voice dripping with scorn. "This is what we're eating. My mom hires a caterer when she has guests." "I'm not a caterer and you're not guests," I said calmly, taking a bite of my own food. "You're family. And this is what family is having for dinner tonight." "I'm not eating it," he declared, pushing his plate away. "It probably has gluten in it. Or germs." The word germs was another one of Brooke's. She had once refused to eat a birthday cake I baked, loudly wondering if my kitchen was properly sanitized. To hear that same sanitized cruelty coming from my grandson's mouth was like a punch to the gut. But I didn't let it show. I simply nodded. "All right. That's your choice. But the kitchen is closed after dinner. There won't be anything else until breakfast." He glared at me, expecting a fight, expecting me to plead with him to eat. When I didn't, his anger seemed to deflate, replaced by a confused frustration. He was used to his outbursts getting a reaction. My calm indifference was a language he didn't understand. He eventually stormed away from the table, and I heard his bedroom door slam shut. Benita and Leo ate a few bites in silence before asking to be excused. The house fell quiet again, but this time it was a wounded quiet, thick with resentment. I cleaned the kitchen, wrapping Aiden's untouched plate in foil and putting it in the refrigerator. As I washed the dishes, I looked out the window into the darkness and felt the first real pang of doubt. Was I doing the right thing? Was this tough, unyielding approach simply driving them further away? I had started this to teach their mother a lesson, but my grandchildren were the ones caught in the crossfire. Later that night, long after I had gone to bed, I couldn't sleep. The silence of the house felt wrong. It wasn't the peaceful silence of my retirement. It was the tense, waiting silence of a battlefield between skirmishes. I decided to check on them. I crept down the hallway, my bare feet silent on the old wooden floorboards. Leo was fast asleep, his face relaxed in a way it hadn't been all day, his arm thrown over his head. Aiden was also asleep, but his sleep seemed angry, his brow furrowed and his blankets kicked into a tangled mess at the foot of his bed. Then I got to Benita's room. The door was cracked open, and I heard a sound, a tiny muffled sob. My heart clenched. I pushed the door open gently. In the faint light from the hallway, I could see her small form huddled under the covers, her shoulders shaking. I sat on the edge of her bed, the mattress dipping with my weight. "Benita? Honey, what's wrong?" She flinched, pulling the covers tighter. "Nothing," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "It doesn't sound like nothing," I said softly, resting my hand on the lump in the blanket where her back was. "You can talk to me." For a long moment, she didn't say anything. I thought maybe she wouldn't. Then slowly she pushed the covers down. Her face was tear-streaked and pale in the dim light. She was clutching something to her chest. It was a small, framed photograph. As she shifted, I saw what it was. It was a picture of the two of us, taken a few years ago at a town fair. I was holding her on my hip, and she had a big smear of pink cotton candy on her cheek. We were both laughing, our heads thrown back in pure, uncomplicated joy. Seeing it felt like looking at a ghost. Not just because it was cruel, but because it was a direct quote. I could hear Brew. "Why are you crying, sweetheart?" I asked again, my voice gentle. Her little body was racked with another sob. Mommy. Mommy says you don't love us anymore, she whispered, the words tumbling out in a rush. She says that's why you don't visit. She says you think we're bad kids, and that you'd rather be alone. The lie was so monstrous, so utterly evil, that it stole the air from my lungs. Brooke hadn't just told them I was fragile or old-fashioned. She had told them I had abandoned them. She had twisted her own cruelty, the blocked calls, the cancelled visits, the lies about parties, and she had laid the blame for it squarely on my shoulders and on theirs. She had made them believe they were unlovable. It wasn't just manipulation. It was psychological warfare against her own children. I pulled her into my arms, and she buried her face in my shoulder, crying openly now. I held her tight, rocking her gently, my own tears welling in my eyes. Oh, Benita, I whispered into her hair. That is the biggest lie I have ever heard. I love you more than all the stars in the sky. I have never, ever stopped loving you. We sat like that for a long time, until her sobs subsided into little hitches in her breath. I felt her begin to relax in my arms, the tension slowly leaving her small body. In that moment, I realized my initial assumption had been completely wrong. I thought I was dealing with spoiled children who needed a lesson in respect. But this wasn't about entitlement or disrespect. This was about survival. These children were living in a house where love was a weapon, where truth was twisted into whatever shape suited their mother's needs. As she calmed down, she started talking, her voice a tiny whisper in the dark. She told me things that made my blood run cold. She told me about the secret trips her mother took, just like this one. She'd be gone for days, sometimes leaving them with strangers Benita called the new sitters, who would just watch TV and order pizza. She told me about the rule. The most important rule in their house. Mommy says we have a code of silence, she whispered, as if afraid the walls were listening. She says good families don't air their dirty laundry. What happens in our house stays in our house. If we tell Dad or if we tell you, it means we don't love her. A code of silence. She was 7 years old when her mother taught her that phrase. Brooke wasn't just neglecting her children. She was actively teaching them how to conceal it. She was isolating them, ensuring no one could ever see the truth. The rumors and confusion I'd felt from a distance were nothing compared to the cold, hard reality of what was happening inside that perfect suburban home. My son Benjamin was working himself to the bone, believing he was providing for a happy family, completely unaware that his wife was abandoning his children and psychologically tormenting them to cover her tracks. I finally understood. I was no longer just a grandmother trying to teach her daughter-in-law a lesson. My mission had changed. This wasn't about winning an argument or earning respect anymore. This was a rescue operation. The fallout from my decision to unplug the Wi-Fi had revealed a sickness in this family that was far deeper and more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. Brooke hadn't just been disrespectful to me. She had been betraying her entire family in the most profound way possible. I tucked Benita back into bed, kissing her forehead. You get some sleep, I told her. And don't you ever worry about what your mother says again. Grandma is here now, and I'm not going anywhere. I walked back to my room, but not to sleep. I went to my desk and turned on the small lamp. I took out a fresh notebook and a pen. My hands were perfectly steady. The doubt I had felt earlier was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I started writing down everything Benita had told me, every detail, every horrifying word. This was no longer just a feeling or a suspicion. This was evidence. Brooke thought she was off on a 2-week vacation, free from all responsibility. She had no idea that back home, in a quiet little house she thought was irrelevant, her entire world was beginning to unravel. And I was the one holding the thread. The morning after my conversation with Benita, the atmosphere in the house had changed. The tension was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was different. It was no longer the straightforward, angry defiance of the first day. Now, it was laced with confusion. Aiden still refused to look at me, but the fiery anger in his eyes had been replaced by a guarded watchfulness. He was observing me, trying to figure out the new rules of this strange, new world. Leo, ever the follower, took his cues from his older brother, remaining quiet and distant. But Benita was my shadow. She followed me into the kitchen as I made pancakes, standing just far enough away to not seem clingy, but close enough that I could feel her presence. She didn't say much, but her eyes, big and soulful, followed my every move. She was testing the waters, trying to see if the safety she had felt in the dark of her room the night before was real, or if it would evaporate in the light of day. I didn't press her. I just moved around the kitchen with a calm I didn't feel, occasionally giving her a small, warm smile. I let her come to me. I served the pancakes, and to my surprise, everyone ate them without complaint. Even Aiden, though he did it with a grimace, as if being forced to enjoy my cooking was a personal defeat. After breakfast, I told them the chore for the day was to help me sort through some old boxes in the attic. I expected a rebellion, but it never came. They followed me upstairs, their footsteps dragging with a familiar reluctance, but they followed. It was in the dusty, quiet attic, surrounded by the ghosts of my past, David's old yearbooks, Benjamin's baby clothes, boxes of my own teaching materials, that the world tilted on its axis. Benita was sitting quietly in a corner, looking through an old photo album, when she suddenly went very still. "Grandma," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, sweetie?" I asked, looking over from a box of old Christmas ornaments. She pointed to a small, sleek tablet computer half hidden under a dusty blanket in an open storage bin. It was one of those expensive, top-of-the-line models, not the kind of thing you just forget in an attic. "That's Mommy's work tablet," she said. She was looking for it before she left. She was really mad she couldn't find it. I walked over and picked it up. It was cold to the touch. Why would it be up here? Benita shrugged, her eyes wide. She told Daddy she lost it. But I saw her put it in that box last week. She has a secret password for it. It's not the same as her phone. My heart began to beat a little faster. A secret tablet with a secret password, hidden in my attic. Why? What could possibly be on here that she needed to hide so desperately? Even from my son. I looked at Benita, and she looked back at me. Her expression a mixture of fear and something else, a silent plea. She was giving me a key, trusting me to open a door. She was too afraid to open herself. "Do you know the password, Benita?" I asked, my voice low. She nodded, biting her lip. "It's Leo's birthday. 0-8-1-4. She looked down at her hands. "She says I'm not supposed to know that." A part of me screamed that this was wrong. This was a violation of privacy. This was a line I shouldn't cross. But then I thought of Benita sobbing in the dark, convinced I didn't love her. I thought of the code of silence and the emotional prison these children were living in. Privacy is a right, but it is not a shield for abuse. I took a deep breath, sat down on an old trunk, and typed in the numbers. The screen lit up, and for a moment it looked perfectly normal. A professional-looking background, a few apps for work documents and emails. I opened the email app first. It was mostly corporate newsletters and spam. Nothing. I felt a wave of relief mixed with disappointment. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was just a paranoid old woman making mountains out of molehills, just as Brooke had always implied. Then I saw it. An app one didn't recognize. Its icon was a simple, plain green square, with no name. It looked out of place among the other corporate apps. My instincts screamed at me to touch it. I tapped the green square, and the screen opened to a messaging application. It wasn't WhatsApp or a normal text messenger. It was something encrypted, something designed to be hidden. There was only one contact listed, a single name, Wiz. The conversation was thousands of messages long. I started at the top, from a few months ago. The first few were flirtatious, casual. But then the tone shifted. It became colder, more transactional. They were making a plan. And as I read, the floor fell out from beneath me. The world I knew, the family I thought I had, it all just dissolved into a nightmare. Wiz. Did the workhorse deposit his bonus yet? Brooke, Friday. The full 20K. He's so predictable. Thinks he's saving for a family vacation to Disney. Wiz. Mickey Mouse can't compete with Miami. Transfer 15 of it to the new account. We need to be liquid. I scrolled down, my hand shaking so badly I could barely control my thumb. Brooke. He's asking questions about the credit card bill. I told him it was for the kids' summer camp deposits. He actually apologized for questioning me. So pathetic. Wiz. You need to get his signature on that home equity line of credit application. Tell him it's to refinance at a lower rate. Brooke, I'll handle it. What about his mother's place? You said we could use it. My breath hitched in my throat. My house. They were talking about my house. Wiz. If he co-signed her original mortgage, his name is on the deed. When he's gone, and we have full custody and power of attorney, that asset becomes part of the marital estate. We bleed it dry. Brooke, the old relic would have a heart attack. Perfect. The old relic. That was me. Not a person, not his mother. Just an asset to be liquidated. An obstacle to be removed. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I thought I might be sick right there in the dusty attic. They weren't just planning to leave him. They were planning to systematically destroy him. To strip him of everything he had ever worked for, including the home he grew up in, the only home I had. They were going to take his children, his money, his future, and leave him a broken man drowning in debt. The 2-week work trip to Puerto Vallarta wasn't a work trip at all. It was the final phase. She was going to Miami to secure the house with Wiz. When she came back, it would be to file for divorce, claim Benjamin was unstable, and disappear with the children and every last penny. Have you ever felt a betrayal this deep? Comment below on how you felt. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the screen, the monstrous words blurring through my tears. Every sacrifice I had ever made for my son flashed before my eyes. Selling my grandmother's locket. Working 2 jobs until my bones ached. The pride I felt at his graduation. The joy at his wedding. It was all a lie. I hadn't raised him to have a wonderful life. I had raised him like a lamb for the slaughter, and I had personally welcomed the wolf into our home. The pain was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest that made it impossible to breathe. I must have made a sound, a small, choked sob, because suddenly Benita was there beside me, her small hand on my arm. She peered at the screen, and though she was too young to understand the financial details, she understood the tone. She saw the name Wiz, a name she must have heard whispered, and she saw the cruel words about her father. Her face crumpled. Is that why Mommy is always laughing on her phone? She asked, her voice trembling. She's always texting and laughing, but not when Daddy is in the room. She tells me Daddy is weak, and that he doesn't know how to make us happy. She says that's why she needs special friends like Uncle Wiz. The raw, calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. She wasn't just deceiving my son. She was actively poisoning his children against him, dismantling his role as their father, piece by piece, right under his own roof. I looked at my granddaughter's tear-streaked face, and something inside me shifted. The overwhelming grief, the suffocating pain. It didn't disappear, but it crystallized. It turned from a fragile, shattering thing into something hard and sharp as a diamond. My tears stopped. My hand grew steady. This was no longer just about Brooke's disrespect or neglect. This was about pure evil. This was a woman preparing to annihilate my son and steal my grandchildren. I pulled Benita into my lap, hugging her tightly. Your daddy is the strongest man I know, I said, my voice low and fierce, a promise whispered in the dusty air. And your mother is a liar. She is a very, very bad person. But you don't have to be scared anymore. She is never going to hurt you or your daddy again. I am going to stop her. Benita looked up at me, her big, brown eyes searching mine. In them, I no longer saw fear. I saw a flicker of hope. She had given me the key, and I had opened the door. Now we were both standing on the other side, looking into the darkness together. And in that moment, I knew that my quiet, peaceful retirement was over. The war had just escalated beyond anything I could have imagined. And I would not lose. I couldn't. Everything, and everyone, I loved was on the line. After the discovery in the attic, the house felt different. The air was thick with a truth that only I knew, a poison I was now carrying in my veins. The tablet lay on my nightstand, dark and silent, but I could feel its presence from every room in the house. It was a dormant bomb, and I knew that when it finally went off, the explosion would shatter my son's life. For 2 days, I went through the motions. I made meals, I suggested games, I enforced the new rules about chores. The children remained wary and resentful, little satellites of misery orbiting a sun they no longer understood. I was waiting. I needed to find the right way, the right time, to tell Benjamin that his entire marriage was a lie, a carefully constructed stage play designed to ruin him. How do you make that phone call? How do you form the words? Your wife is stealing all your money, and she's been planning it for months with her lover? The task felt so monumental, so catastrophic, that I found myself paralyzed by the sheer weight of it. The explosion came on the third day, but it wasn't the one I was expecting. It was literal. I was in the kitchen washing dishes when I heard it. A deafening bang from the living room, followed by a whoosh of air and the sound of shattering glass. My heart leaped into my throat. I ran into the room to find a scene of pure chaos. One of my beautiful bay windows was broken, a spiderweb of cracks radiating from a black hole in the center. A small fire was greedily eating the edge of my favorite armchair, and the room was filled with the acrid, sulfurous smell of gunpowder. In the middle of the floor stood Leo, his eyes wide with terror, a pack of firecrackers in his hand. "Lao!" I screamed, grabbing the fire extinguisher from under the kitchen sink, and dousing the flames before they could spread. Black foam covered the charred remains of the chair. Smoke hung in the air like a heavy shroud. Aiden and Benita stood frozen, staring at the destruction. Aiden found his voice first, and he didn't use it to reprimand his brother. He used it to attack me. "Look what you did!" he shrieked, his face contorted with a rage that was far too old for his years. "You made him do it. We've been so bored since you took our screens away. Mom lets us do whatever we want. He set a fire in my house, Aiden," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of fear and fury. "This isn't about being bored. This is dangerous. He could have burned the whole house down." "It's your fault," he screamed back, his voice cracking. "Mom said this would happen. She said you'd try to turn us against her. She said you hate her because she's young and pretty and you're just old and jealous. This is our house anyway. This is our inheritance." There it was. The word. Inheritance. The final piece of his mother's poisoned philosophy. That I wasn't a person. That this house wasn't my home. A place I had built with love and sacrifice. It was just a thing, an asset, that they were waiting to collect. The cold, transactional language from the tablet was now spilling from my grandson's lips. The last thread of my composure snapped. I walked over to him, my eyes locked on his. The old, patient Teresa was gone. The woman who stood before him now was someone he had never met. "Let me be very clear with you, Aiden," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "This is my house. I own it. I worked my entire life for it. And you are here as my guest. And as for your inheritance," I let the word hang in the air, heavy with his greed. "There is no inheritance. I called my lawyer last week. I changed my will. Everything I own, this house, my savings, my pension, is going to an orphanage when I die. You and your siblings will not get a single penny." The color drained from his face. He stared at me, his mouth agape, unable to process what I had said. He believed, with the absolute certainty of a child who has never been told no, that the world belonged to him. I had just told him it didn't. "You're lying," he finally whispered. "Am I?" I walked over to the bookshelf, where a small digital audio recorder, which I had started carrying with me at all times, was disguised as a book. I pressed play. His own voice filled the room, tinny and shrill. "This is our house anyway. This is our inheritance." Then came my voice, cold and clear. "There is no inheritance. Everything is going to an orphanage." I stopped the recording. "Now do you still think I'm lying?" Something inside him shattered. It was the sound of a carefully constructed world crumbling to dust. He let out a roar of pure, animalistic fury. "I hate you," he screamed, and then he launched himself at the living room. It wasn't just a tantrum, it was a demolition. He swept a vase of flowers off the mantelpiece, sending water and glass skittering across the floor. He tore a framed photo of my late husband and me from the wall, and threw it to the ground. Benita, caught up in the storm of his rage, started sobbing and kicking at the legs of the coffee table. Leo, seeing his siblings' distress, began throwing couch cushions across the room. His earlier fear forgotten in the contagious chaos. They were destroying my home. ripping apart the sanctuary I had spent my life building. And I just stood there, by the doorway, perfectly still. I didn't yell. I didn't try to stop them. I simply lifted the small, hidden camera I had placed on the bookshelf a few days prior, held it steady, and filmed every second of it. I recorded the rage, the destruction, the raw, unfiltered consequences of Brooke's parenting. When the storm finally passed, the living room was a wasteland. The three of them stood in the wreckage, panting, their anger spent. All that was left was a hollow, trembling exhaustion. They looked at me, their eyes finally clear of the red haze of fury, expecting my wrath. I lowered the camera and spoke, my voice devoid of anger, filled only with a profound and terrible sadness. "Look at this," I said softly, gesturing to the ruins of my living room. "Look at what she has turned you into. She taught you that things are more important than people. She taught you that love is something you own. She taught you that rage is how you solve problems. Everything you just did, that was her, not you." Benita burst into fresh tears, but this time they were tears of shame, not anger. Aiden just stared at the floor, his shoulders slumped in defeat. It was Leo, the little agent of chaos, who delivered the final, devastating blow. He walked over to me, his face streaked with dirt and tears, and tugged on my sleeve. "Mommy says I'm her special firecracker," he whispered, his little voice trembling. "She says I'm not boring like Daddy. She says Uncle Wiz is my special friend, and he gave me my bright hair because he's a firecracker too." The words didn't make sense. They were the disjointed, parroted phrases of a 7-year-old. Benjamin has dark, quiet hair, like mine. Leo's hair was a sandy blonde, almost reddish in the light. We'd always just called it a genetic quirk, a throwback to some distant relative. He gave me my bright hair. What did that even mean? Aiden looked up, his face pale. "That's a stupid lie, Leo. Uncle Wiz is just Mom's friend from work." Benita, who had been silent, suddenly spoke, her voice sharp with a pain that went beyond the broken room. "No, he isn't," she said, looking directly at Aiden. "I heard Mom on the phone with him. She was laughing," she said. "She said she hoped Leo would look just like him, because then Benjamin would be too stupid to ever notice." Time stopped. The air in the room became thick and heavy, impossible to breathe. It wasn't a key turning in a lock. It was a bomb detonating in the deepest chamber of my heart. The affair. The financial ruin. The emotional abuse. All of it, every horrific piece of the puzzle I had been assembling, was just a distraction. It was a smokescreen for a betrayal so fundamental, so monstrous, that my mind could barely comprehend it. She hadn't just cheated on my son. She hadn't just planned to rob him. She had given him a child that was not his own. She had let him fall in love with a little boy, let him pour his heart and his hopes and his future into him, knowing the entire time that it was all a lie. The plan wasn't just to leave him with nothing. It was to leave him with nothing while he was chained for 18 years to the ultimate symbol of her betrayal. Wiz wasn't just her lover. He was Leo's father. I looked at Leo, my sweet, chaotic grandson, with his bright hair and his mischievous smile, and all I could see was a stranger. A ghost. The living embodiment of my son's utter and complete destruction. The tablet on my nightstand told a story of greed, but the words that had just spilled from the mouths of these broken children revealed a depth of evil I never knew was possible. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my very soul, that this was a secret that would not just break my son's heart. It would obliterate his soul. And I was the one who was going to have to tell him. For a long moment after Benita's words fell into the ruined silence of my living room, nobody moved. The world had shrunk to that single, impossible fact. Leo, my bright, chaotic Leo, was not my son's son. The knowledge didn't land like a bombshell. It seeped into the room like a colorless, odorless poison, contaminating every memory, every smile, every hug I had ever shared with that little boy. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time, I saw the ghost of another man in his features. It was a phantom that had been there all along, but I had been too blind, too trusting, to see it. The children stood amidst the wreckage they had created, their anger and entitlement finally extinguished, replaced by a raw, terrifying vulnerability. They had broken my things, but their mother had broken their lives, and they were only just beginning to understand the pieces. Before I could even begin to process my own grief, a sharp knock echoed from the front door. My first thought was that it was Brooke, somehow returned early, and a primal, protective instinct surged through me. But when I looked through the peephole, I saw a woman I didn't know. She was middle-aged, with a kind but serious face, and she held a clipboard. I opened the door. "Teresa Mills?" she asked, her voice calm and professional. "My name is Laurel. I'm from Child Protective Services. We received an anonymous call expressing concern about the welfare of the children staying with you." An anonymous call. Of course. Brooke hadn't just left, she had laid a trap. She must have had a friend or neighbor make the call, hoping they'd find me overwhelmed, unable to cope, proving her narrative that I was a fragile old woman unfit to care for her precious children. It was a move of breathtaking cynicism. She had delivered her children into a chaotic situation of her own making, and then called the authorities to witness the fallout. For a second, panic seized me. The state of my living room, the fire extinguisher foam, the shattered glass, it was a nightmare. But then I looked at Laurel's steady, observant eyes, and I knew that this was not a trap. This was an opportunity. This was the moment the truth could finally come out, not just from my mouth, but from a place of official authority. "Please come in," I said, my voice steady. I opened the door wider, making no attempt to hide the devastation inside. Laurel stepped into the entryway, her eyes taking in the scene. She didn't gasp or show any shock. She simply observed, her gaze moving from the broken window to the charred armchair, and finally, to the 3 children huddled together, their faces pale and streaked with tears. She knelt down to their level, her voice soft. "That's a big mess," she said gently. "Did something scary happen here?" It was Leo who answered, his voice a tiny whisper. "I made a firecracker go boom." "He did," I confirmed. "And his brother and sister helped him redecorate." I saw a flicker of something in Laurel's eyes. Not judgment, but understanding. She spent the next hour with us. She spoke to the children, first together, then each one separately in the kitchen. I couldn't hear what they said, but I saw their body language through the doorway. I saw Aiden's defensive posture slowly crumble. I saw Benita begin to talk, her hands fluttering as she explained things. I saw Leo lean against the table, looking small and lost. When she was done, she came to me. We sat at the kitchen table, the damning tablet lying between us. "Mrs. Mills," she began, her professional demeanor softening with a deep, human compassion. "What those children have described, and what I've observed here, it points to a pattern of severe emotional neglect and psychological manipulation. The clinical terms, so calm and detached, were somehow more horrifying than any angry words could have been. They've been encouraged to act out, their mother's words have been used to isolate them from their family, and they've been conditioned to keep secrets. This," she said, gesturing back toward the living room, "this isn't just a tantrum. This is a symptom of a much deeper problem. The destruction here is a physical manifestation of the chaos they're living in." I pushed the tablet across the table. "I think you'll find the cause of that problem right here," I said. I told her everything. About the messages, the financial fraud, the plan to take the children to Miami. As I spoke, I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were a witness testifying about someone else's life. But when I got to the final, terrible revelation about Leo's paternity, my voice broke. Laurel listened to it all, her expression unreadable. She took notes, she asked clarifying questions, and when I was finished, she looked at me with a profound sadness. "You need to call your son, Teresa," she said. "He needs to come home. Now. I will file my initial report, and we will be prepared to conduct a formal investigation the moment their mother returns. Document everything. Every word. Every action." After she left, the house was quieter than it had ever been. It was the quiet of an operating room after a failed surgery. I knew what I had to do. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over Benjamin's name. This call would be the single most cruel and necessary thing I had ever done in my life. I pressed the button. He answered on the second ring. His voice tired but cheerful. "Hey Mom. How are my little terrors doing? Driving you crazy yet?" I couldn't speak. A sob was lodged in my throat like a stone. "Mom." His voice changed instantly, laced with alarm. Mom, what is it? Are the kids okay? The kids are safe, Benjamin. I finally managed to say, my voice a raw whisper. But you need to come home. You need to come home right now. The 3-hour drive from Columbus felt like an eternity. When his car finally pulled into the driveway, I was waiting on the porch. He ran up the steps, his face etched with worry. What happened? Where are the kids? They're in the backyard, I said. Benjamin, before you go in, we need to talk. We sat on the porch swing, the same one David had hung for me 30 years ago. And I told him everything. I started with the financial deception, the lies, the affair. I watched as my son's face, the face I had loved and protected his entire life, went from confusion to disbelief to a deep, wrenching agony. He put his head in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking. How could I have been so stupid? He whispered, his voice muffled. All the signs were there. The late nights, the work trips, the way she was with money. I just didn't want to see it. I put my arm around him, holding him as I had when he was a little boy with a scraped knee. But this was a wound no bandage could fix. It's not your fault, honey. You loved her. You trusted her. I gave her everything, Mom, he said, his voice breaking. Everything I had. I know, I said softly. And then, I took a breath and prepared to take the last thing he had left. His own reality. Benjamin, there's one more thing. The hardest thing. I told him about Leo. The silence that followed was absolute. He didn't cry. He didn't rage. He just went completely still, his face becoming a pale, blank mask. He looked up at me, his eyes empty of everything but a pain so profound I could barely stand to look at it. He had the look of a man who had just been told his entire world was an illusion. He stood up without a word and walked through the house, not even seeming to notice the wreckage in the living room. He slid open the glass door to the backyard. The children were huddled together on the grass. When they saw him, they ran to him. Benita and Aiden threw their arms around his legs, sobbing his name. Leo stood back for a moment, hesitant. Then he too ran forward. Benjamin looked down at the little boy with the sandy blonde hair. The child of his heart, but not of his blood. For a heart-stopping second, I saw him flinch. But then, he knelt down and wrapped his arms around all three of them, pulling them into a tight embrace, burying his face in their hair as his own silent tears finally began to fall. In that moment, watching my son hold the living proof of his wife's ultimate betrayal, I saw that Brooke had failed. She had tried to destroy him, but she had only succeeded in showing him what he was truly made of. The weeks that followed were a blur of lawyers, therapists, and healing. Brooke returned from her trip, not to a loving family, but to an empty house, a restraining order, and a detective waiting to question her about financial fraud and conspiracy. The evidence from the tablet, combined with Laurel's official CPS report, was overwhelming. Faced with the threat of jail time, she crumbled. She signed away her parental rights in exchange for Benjamin not pressing criminal charges for the fraud. She vanished from our lives as quickly as she had entered them. A ghost leaving behind a trail of devastation. The DNA test confirmed what we already knew. Leo was Wiz's son. Benjamin was given a choice no man should ever have to make. But for him it wasn't a choice at all. One evening he came to me and said, "She may have given birth to him, Mom. But he is my son. Love is what makes a father, not blood." And so we began to rebuild. Benjamin got a promotion at work, using the new salary to slowly pay off the secret debts Brooke had accrued. The children, free from their mother's poison, began to blossom. With the help of a wonderful child psychologist, they learned to process their trauma and to trust again. Aiden learned that strength wasn't about anger. Benita found her voice. And Leo was just a happy little boy who adored his father. One day, I was cleaning out the last of the damaged things from the living room when Leo came to me. He was holding a photograph, the one from the mantelpiece that Aiden had thrown to the floor. It was the picture of David and me, but the frame had broken and the photo itself was torn right down the middle, separating us. He handed the two pieces to me. "Can you fix it, Grandma?" he asked, his eyes full of hope. I looked at the torn photo, a perfect symbol of our broken family. "Yes, baby," I told him, pulling him into a hug. "We can fix it. It might always have a little scar, but we can put it back together." And that's what we did. We put our family back together. It wasn't the same family. It was something new, something stronger, forged in the fires of betrayal, and held together by a love that had been tested and proven true. As for me, I found a new purpose. Surrounded by the quiet healing of my family, I finally turned that spare room into an art studio. I filled it with paints and clay and laughter, starting a small after-school art workshop for the neighborhood kids. I called it Teresa's Art House. It became a place of joy and creation, a place where I could heal myself by helping others find their own color in the world. I learned that sometimes, the life you planned for isn't the life you get, but the one you build from the ashes can be far more beautiful. Our story is a testament to the fact that the deepest wounds can heal, and that the truest definition of family isn't about the absence of scars, but about the courage to put the pieces back together. What does it truly mean to forgive? When the person you have to forgive is the one who created the life you love. It's funny how life works. For 40 years, my world was shaped by the sound of a school bell, the scent of chalk dust, and the bright, hopeful faces of 7-year-olds. Then, for a short while, my world was shaped by silence, deceit, and a cold, creeping dread. Now, my world is a beautiful, chaotic symphony of color and sound. It's the smell of wet paint and baking cookies. It's the sound of children's laughter, not the shrill, unhappy kind, but deep, genuine giggles of joy. It's the sight of my 3 grandchildren, their faces smeared with clay and their eyes shining with pride as they hold up their lopsided little creations. This is my life now. This is Teresa's Art House. After Brooke left, a quiet fell over our lives. It wasn't a peaceful quiet at first. It was the heavy, fragile quiet of a house that has survived a hurricane. Everything was still standing, but we were all walking on tiptoes, afraid to touch anything for fear it might crumble. The first few months were the hardest. Benjamin was like a ghost in his own life. He went to work, he came home, he went through the motions of being a father, but his eyes were haunted. He was grieving a life he never really had, a wife who never really existed. The children were struggling too. They had nightmares. Aiden would lash out with sudden, unexplained anger. Benita would retreat into a shell of silence for hours at a time. And Leo, sweet Leo, would sometimes ask where his mommy was, his innocent question twisting a knife in all our hearts. We got help. All of us. We found a wonderful family therapist, Dr. Weck, a woman with a gentle voice and eyes that saw everything. She taught us how to talk to each other, how to name the ugly things that had happened to us. She gave us the tools to start rebuilding. She explained to the children that what their mother did was not their fault. She told them that they were not unlovable, that they had been victims of a sickness called parental alienation. For Aiden, it was like a key unlocking a cage he didn't know he was in. He finally understood that the anger and resentment he felt toward me, toward his father, had been planted there. A poison dripped into his ear, day after day. Slowly, painstakingly, we began to heal. We started a new tradition. Family Project Night. Every Friday, we'd tackle something together. One week, we repainted the living room, covering the smoke stains and bad memories with a bright, cheerful yellow. Another week, we built a birdhouse for the backyard. We were learning to be a team, a real family. Benjamin started to come back to us, piece by piece. The love he had for his children, especially for Leo, became his anchor. He never treated Leo any differently. If anything, he held him closer, as if to protect him from the sins of his parentage. He was determined that Leo would never feel like he was anything less than a beloved son. As the children began to heal, I realized I needed to heal too. For my entire adult life, I had been a teacher or a mother. My purpose was always tied to someone else. Now I was just Teresa. The art studio I had dreamed of became my sanctuary. At first, I just painted for myself, covering canvases with the swirling emotions I couldn't put into words. Then Benita started joining me, then Leo, then even Aiden, who discovered he had a surprising talent for sculpture. The neighborhood kids would see us through the window and ask if they could join. Before I knew it, my little hobby had turned into a full-blown after-school workshop. Teresa's Art House was born. It filled my home with life and purpose in a way I had never expected. About a year after Brooke was gone, I got a call from the principal at Lincoln Elementary, my old school. He'd heard about my workshops and asked if I would be interested in coming back once a week as a special guest to run an art program for the students. Standing in that familiar hallway, smelling that old familiar smell of floor wax and school lunches, it felt like my life had come full circle. I was a teacher again, but on my own terms, sharing a part of myself that I had kept hidden for so long. The real culmination of our journey, the moment I knew we were truly going to be okay, came on Mother's Day. I woke up to the smell of burning toast and a chorus of slightly off-key singing. Benjamin and the children came into my room carrying a tray with a lopsided stack of pancakes and a single, slightly wilted dandelion in a glass of water. It was the most beautiful breakfast I had ever seen. After we ate, Aiden, my serious, guarded Aiden, cleared his throat. He was holding a piece of paper, his hand trembling slightly. "We wrote something for you," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. He read an essay he'd written for school titled, "My Hero." It was about me. He wrote about how I had been brave when they were scared, how I had been strong when they were falling apart. He wrote, "My grandmother taught me that a home isn't a building, and family isn't just blood. It's the people who show up and stay, even when things are broken." By the time he finished, we were all crying. Then Benita read a poem about how my house was full of sunshine now. And little Leo gave me a drawing. It was a picture of our family, all 5 of us, holding hands under a giant, smiling sun. In the picture, I was wearing a crown. Benjamin was the last to speak. He was holding a large manila envelope. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For a long time, these kids didn't have the mother they deserved. But they do now. You've been more than just a grandmother. You've been their rock, their safe place, their real mother." He opened the envelope and slid a stack of papers across the bed. They were legal documents. He and the children had gone to a lawyer. They were petitioning the court to make me their legal guardian, to officially give me the maternal rights that Brooke had abandoned. "We're already a family," Benjamin said, his eyes shining with tears. "This just makes it official. We want the world to know what we already do. You're our mom." I looked at their faces, these 3 beautiful, resilient children and my wonderful, strong son, and I felt a sense of peace so profound it was like the whole universe was humming a gentle song just for me. My life hadn't turned out the way I had planned when I was a young woman dreaming of a future with my husband. It had been shattered and remade, scarred and patched back together. But in that moment I knew, with every fiber of my being, that it was more whole, more real, and more full of love than anything I could have ever imagined. My story had a happy ending, but it started from a place of deep pain and betrayal. It forced me to become a person I never thought I'd be, a fighter, a strategist, a woman who had to be as cunning as her enemy to protect her family. It leaves me with a question that I still think about in the quiet moments of the night. So I want to ask you, what would you have done if you were in my shoes? When you saw the depth of the deceit, when you realized everything you held dear was about to be destroyed, would you have done what I did? Let me know in the comments below. I truly want to know. And if you think my story was shocking, wait until you hear the next one I have to share. It's about a man who discovered his wife was secretly replacing his family's savings with fake money, and what he found when he followed her to the bank will make your jaw drop. This journey has taught me that the world can be a dark place, filled with people like Brooke who use lies and manipulation as their currency. But it has also taught me that light is always stronger than darkness. Honesty, compassion, and love are not just nice ideas. They are the most powerful weapons we have. If you believe that, if you believe in standing up for what's right, then I'd ask you to join our family. Hit that subscribe button if you believe in honesty and compassion. Only people who support lies and manipulation would refuse to join us in spreading the truth. Thank you for listening. Always remember, at Virtuous Stories, we love you.